Author Thomas King wrote, "The truth about stories is that's all we are. We are the stories we hear, the stories we tell, and the stories we create. And together we have collective stories, such as the one we are co-creating here this morning." I'm going to share with you some stories I've learned studying culture and digital technologies. We all have stories and they deserve to be heard. So in my research, I decided to listen to people's stories and reflect on my own through a process called testimonio, or testimony. Testimonio serves as a space for teaching and learning from lived experiences. I want to tell you about a woman whose parents came to this country on the freedom flights from Cuba. She was raised in Miami, became a single mother at an early age, and went on to become a middle school math teacher. When her son was a teenager about to start high school, she decided to move 3,000 miles to Seattle with the hopes of studying people and their personal relationships with technology. She quickly learned more than she could have imagined about her life, her relations, and what it means to teach in ways that honor and respect people's values, beliefs, and worldviews. She enrolled in a course called Cross-Cultural Approaches to Leadership, and there she learned about her own indigeneity, her own sacred heritage, challenging many of her assumptions and transforming this single mother into the communicator and educator who stands before you today. It was here that I learned more about my heritage. Did you know that Cubans are a blend of indigenous, Spanish, African, and Asian ancestry, a true multi-ethnic peoples? I didn't, because not all parts of my identities had been equally valued or celebrated. It didn't take long for me to learn about the concept of relationality. Relationality was a new term for me. It basically means all our connections and their importance to our shared humanity. We are in relationship with the land, with each other, and with our collective stories. I'd like to take this time to acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all the tribes and bands within the Tulalip, Suquamish, and Muckleshoot nations. Let me tell you about Casa Latina. It's a Seattle-based nonprofit founded in 1994. Casa Latina is a vibrant immigrant worker rights organization, and through employment, education, and organizing, they empower low-wage Latino immigrants to move from economic insecurity to economic prosperity, and to lift their voices to take action around public policy issues that affect them. Upon starting my doctoral journey, I began attending Casa Latina's women's leadership group called Mujeres Sin Fronteras, or Women Without Borders. And being there week after week with the women, it changed me, and it challenged many of the assumptions I had. You see, I thought I was there to teach them how to use technologies and to imagine a curriculum design that was relevant for them and their lives. But as I sat in the room and I listened to them share stories about their hopes, dreams, and fears, stories about wanting to use technologies that were relevant for them and their children, technologies for communicating with their families near and far, technologies to navigate school information for themselves and their children, and the stories that brought them to the United States. I witnessed their collective care and how they held space to be truly present. Each one of their stories were stories of courage and hope, stories of the unknown, of knowing where they're from and where they are, but maybe of not feeling quite at home or equally valued. And I heard stories about how people made them feel, such as the woman who said, "This phone is smart, but I'm not," and how they internalized these messages. And I witnessed how they used technology in similar ways and in creative and innovative ways to meet their information and communication needs. On more than one occasion, I would leave the leadership's workshops moved to tears, without words, humbled at their greatness, courage, and love. And in those early years, I tried my best just to listen. I witnessed their courage. I saw how they risked their livelihood to stand up for what they believe. And I treasure how they cared for and celebrated each other as they fought for community, dignity, and care for all people. The women reminded me of the importance to use your voice and your position to stand up for what you believe, even when you are afraid. And the value of mutual respect and belonging while still being uniquely and totally you. I realized then that I had nothing to teach them, or anyone else for that matter, if I first was not willing or able to listen to them and their stories. Ursula Le Guin writes, "Words are events. They do things. They change things. They transform both the speaker and hearer. They feed energy back and forth and amplify it. They feed understanding back and forth and amplify it." I believe the same is true for technology. It changes things. It transforms things in the lives of users and non-users alike. We're each navigating our relationships with technology, and in doing so, I have found that people do different things for the same reason, or the same thing for very different reasons. Likewise, there are many different ways to get to our destination or desired outcomes. Not good or bad, just different. And if something feels comfortable and familiar, or uncomfortable and unfamiliar, for you, that experience is valid, and your experience matters. In planning this talk, I imagined putting my teacher hat on and asking you to introduce yourself to your neighbor, take out your cell phone or smartphone, or not so smartphone, unlocking it, and having them do a search on your phone. Lucky for you, having 700 people in the room, that's a challenge to pull off. But imagine, what does it look like? Are you familiar with it? Do you know what brand it is? Do you recognize it? Is it smart, old, new, dumb? The goal of that activity is to demonstrate how unfamiliar personal devices can be, even if you feel comfortable with your technology. Even if the phone or operating system are the same, likely the organization is different. I've spent the last 6 years listening to the stories we consume about the value of technologies. I've witnessed how we internalize these messages, what we tell each other and ourselves. And we say things like, "I'm not good with technology," even when we are. Or we say things like, "I need to learn intertechnology here," right? Name your device. And how we reinforce these messages onto each other, saying things like, "Everyone is on social media. What do you mean you don't have a smartphone, cell phone?" Or, "This is the latest, greatest tool, technology solution." I've learned that the quality of your phone or connection does not equal the quality of your person. And if we want people to understand us and to challenge how our actions reflect our values, we need to share what we do and why, because it's not visible and it's not evident. One day, the organizers of the women's group asked me to host a volunteer from another organization. I thought, surely this is my chance to be an ally and to get to know how I can be really engaged with the audience, right? He's going to do it right. Surely this volunteer could model what I realized I was missing. You'll never believe what happened. It was a young man in his 20s, late 20s, early 30s. He was also Latino. He was there to talk to the women about financial planning, the importance of budgeting, short and long-term goals, and savings. He was sharply dressed. He had on nice shoes and a watch, and beautifully printed color pamphlets for financial planning. You know the kind I'm talking about, the kind you take home and don't write on so you don't mess it up? He walked the women through a series of well-organized PowerPoint slides. There were approximately 10 women in the room that day, and most of them were old enough to have been his mother. And I sat there in shock. You see, I knew, just like each one of them, that their financial realities did not match his beautifully printed PowerPoint slides, printed guide, or pre-populated examples. that depended on stable income, but rather that their financial planning was much more fluid, fluctuating day by day, depending on project-based or seasonal work assignments. In our current systems, we don't have a good way to recognize or embrace fluidity, financial or otherwise. Halfway through his 2-hour presentation, I raised my hand and I invited one of the women to share how she manages her finances. And she engaged with the speaker and with the other women. The whole room lit up. Then, almost as if a robot, he reverted back to his pre-programmed presentation. His content was irrelevant for his audience and disconnected from their lives. And for most of the 2 hours, he stood there talking at the women. From where I was sitting, it was a missed opportunity. And it reminded me yet again of the importance to take time to know your audience and what stories they bring. Close your eyes. Think of how you have connected with people so far this morning. Did you get a chance to greet a neighbor with a smile? Shake a hand or provide a much-needed hug to an old or new friend alike? What technologies have you used this morning? What are the stories of your relationships with technology? Now open your eyes. I want you to think about, what can you control? What do you decide to invite into your life and why? Who gets to make those decisions? How are those decisions regarded by those around you? How are different technologies or platforms relevant for your personal sense of well-being, safety, security, privacy? How are your values manifested offline similar or different to those you manifest online? And how do you create space for other people's stories? How do you respect other people and their context and personal decisions about technology? How are the spaces for personal choices respected where you work or volunteer, in your learning institutions, with different communities or people you are a part of or come in contact with? Thomas King reminds us that stories are wondrous things, and they are dangerous. Our personal relationships with technologies are happening within social systems, which include cultural, social, political, and economic sectors interwoven. It is therefore important to reject single or universal narratives about people and their relationships with technologies, because there's nothing single or universal about it. From the stories that bring us to the technology, the stories that frame our values and worldviews, the physical devices and their design stories, the software and connectivity, everything is mediated by differing stories. Listening to the women and their stories challenged my own assumptions of what I thought people needed and why, and what I thought might be relevant. And I learned the importance that all people deserve to have their personal choices respected, especially about which technologies they invite into their lives. Now, I'm not talking about an abstract of them. I'm talking about each individual and their personal stories and respecting them. It was alongside my friend and mentor, Martin Wolski, in his Community Informatics Studio course, that I was able to articulate a framework that centered on people to align and guide processes. Processes that would enable the kinds of dialogue and diverse voices needed for a successful project implementation, from conceptualization to evaluation. A process centered on communicating love, humility, faith in humankind, hope, mutual trust, and critical thinking. It was with the women and alongside urban educator Richard Milner and a friend and mentor Sandra Cuban that I embraced the idea of starting where we are in my teaching, because everyone is starting somewhere. I learned that sharing one identity did not mean sharing all identities, and that the notion of types of users based on who they are, what they look like, their political leanings, where they come from, sex, gender expression, income, ability, sexuality, and the color of their skin is fundamentally flawed. We are unique beings. Our whole selves and our collection of stories deserve to be listened to and respected. Our choices about technology need to be treated with care and dignity. Just like in this room, there are people I came across using more technologies than I was and am, and people using less or pushing back. And I've learned that true diversity and inclusion means being okay with the spectrum and to coexist, cooperate, collaborate across differences in ways that are respectful of people's stories. I was transformed during my time with the women. It was then that I realized the power and privilege of having your personal stories regarding your relationships with technologies respected. When I met my now husband, Greg, I was 95% certain I wasn't going to have any more children. He too challenged my assumptions. I am now the proud mother of two, a 21-year-old college student and wrestler, and an almost 5-month-old baby girl. I'm careful about the stories I share with my baby girl because they will forever shape the way she understands the world, her relations, her responsibilities, and her potential. The fact that she was born in 2016 is a great concern for me as a parent and educator because we're living in a time where technology permeates every aspect of our lives. A time in which so much technology is intertwined, yet the perils of relying on it are not so easily understood, nor is the intent of those in control. Technologies are designed by people like you and me, with their own stories, with their worldviews, values, and beliefs infused. I worry about the stories my daughter will hear about technologies. I value technologies and the wonderful things that we as humans can do with them, but technologies are not neutral. They amplify human intent. In 2010, this Cuban single mom and her son traveled 3,000 miles with the hopes of pursuing a doctorate in library and information science at the University of Washington, because I wanted to be a professor. Now, I'm not so sure where my scholarship or practice will take me, but I do know that I want to change the world. I want to transform how we talk to each other about technology. I want to challenge a process that I've witnessed over and over, a process that prioritizes the technology or artifacts instead of the people and their stories. This is your call to action. There's no one way to act, but rather a collection of ways. Think about your personal stories, about your relationships with technology. How are the values you hold being reinforced or interrupted by the choices or decisions you make regarding technology? How are the choices affecting those around you? And how are other people's choices affecting you? Be willing to pause, reflect, and reframe on the human stories that accompany them, because it's important. Next time you're talking about technology with a friend, coworker, or student, reflect on your use of language. Do you make assumptions about what technologies people use and why? Lean in. Be curious. You might learn something about their story and their personal decisions about technology. Remember, respect and dignity for all is just that. If we value diverse communities, we should be aware of our personal, cultural, and technological differences. Be mindful of people's limitations acquiring technologies. Don't assume that everybody's access is like yours. The how, what, why will likely be different, as well as the how often and how they feel about it. Let's be mindful of how we care for one another across those differences and how we model that caring for the next generations. In Thomas King's The Truth About Stories, he writes, "The truth about stories is that's all we are. This is your story now. Do with it what you will. Tell it to your friends, forget it. But don't say in the years to come that you would have lived your life differently if only you had heard this story. You've heard it now."